All right, so get ready because today we are going to be diving deep into Infinite Crisis. Um, Big moment in DC Comics history. You listeners have sent in excerpts about it, and I'm really curious to see how Infinite Crisis tackled this concept of heroism in the DC universe.
Mm.
So, for those who maybe aren't familiar, Infinite Crisis was this huge comic book event back in 2005, and it acted as a direct sequel to the legendary Crisis on Infinite Earths.
It's fascinating that you want to explore that angle because Infinite Crisis wasn't just a sequel in terms of the plot. It really dug into the legacy of Crisis on Infinite Earths and the whole idea of the DC multiverse.
Right, Crisis on Infinite Earths. That was just this massive shape-up, simplifying decades of this really complicated continuity, and it seems like Infinite Crisis actually brought back some of that complexity with like the parallel Earths and all these alternate versions of characters.
Yeah, and that's the intriguing part. On the surface, it seems like a step backwards. But what's
Hmm.
brilliant is how Infinite Crisis uses the multiverse to explore a deeper question. Like, what does heroism mean in a world that's constantly changing?
Okay, now I'm hooked. Tell me more about how Infinite Crisis goes beyond just, the superhero punches and dives into these deeper themes.
Remember how in Crisis on Infinite Earth, some key characters decided to step away from the main DC universe? They kind of went into this self-imposed exile in a pocket dimension, like this paradise that they made themselves.
I vaguely remember that.
Yeah.
Who exactly were these characters?
We're talking heavy hitters like Kal-El, the Superman from Earth 2, and the original Superboy from Earth Prime. Even Alexander Luthor Jr. from a world where everybody's morals were reversed. And Lois Lane Kent from Earth 2 ended up there.
Wow, that's quite a mix. So they basically became spectators watching how the DC universe was evolving after they left.
Precisely, and that's where the real tension of Infinite Crisis starts brewing. These characters, who represent a more classic idea of heroism, they start to see the flaws in the post-crisis world. They see the heroes of this new generation struggling, making compromises, and sometimes even crossing lines they never would have.
So it's like they become almost disillusioned by what they're witnessing.
Exactly. It raises the question, are these older heroes being overly idealistic, clinging to an outdated way of thinking? Or are they seeing something the current heroes are blind to? Infinite Crisis really forces us to grapple with that question.
Okay, that makes their presence in this story so much more interesting than just,
Yeah.
a bunch of old-timers showing up. But before we dive into how this clash of ideals plays out, can you remind me how DC actually built up to this massive event?
They were incredibly clever about it. They started with this one-shot called Countdown to Infinite Crisis, which was like a ripple in a pond, hinting at the bigger chaos to come. But they didn't stop there.
Of course not. This is DC Comics. Things are never that simple.
You know it. They rolled out 4 separate limited series, the OMAC Project, Ranthanagar War, Day of Vengeance, and Villains United, each one focused on a different corner of the DC universe, building tension and setting the stage.
It's like they were weaving this intricate tapestry of storylines, drawing readers deeper and deeper into the world before the main event even started.
Exactly. And they didn't forget about legacy either. They had DC Special, The Return of Donna Troy, which tackled themes of heroism and identity, particularly for female characters. It's subtly built on this idea that the very definition of hero was being challenged.
So these weren't just random stories. They were laying the groundwork for Infinite Crisis. And this was all happening across different comic titles, right?
Absolutely. Infinite Crisis had tie-in storylines throughout the entire DC universe. It was a truly immersive event, touching every corner of this fictional world.
Okay, so we've got these disillusioned heroes watching from the sidelines, these brewing conflicts across the universe, and these tie-in stories building the tension. This feels like a powder keg ready to explode.
Yeah.
What were some of the specific tie-ins that stand out in your mind?
There are a few key ones that really highlight the thematic core of Infinite Crisis. For example, you have Superman, Sacrifice, where Superman faces impossible choices and has to confront the limits of his own moral code. It's a story that asks, what happens when even Superman is pushed to the breaking point?
That sounds intense. And I remember hearing about the Justice League Watchtower getting destroyed during Infinite Crisis. Was that part of a tie-in as well?
Yes, that happened in JLA Crisis of Conscience, which was all about the fallout from a previous storyline where the Justice League had mind-wiped some villains. It forced them to question whether they were truly heroes or just playing judge and jury. The destruction of the Watchtower was a huge symbolic moment, showing that even the most powerful symbols of justice could crumble.
Man, that's heavy stuff. And didn't Infinite Crisis also mark the return of Jason Todd?
Mm.
The second Robin who had died years earlier?
You're right, Batman. Under the Hood was a major tie-in that added a deeply personal layer to the whole event. Jason Todd comes back as this ruthless vigilante called Red Hood, forcing Batman to confront the consequences of his own actions and the cycle of violence he's caught in.
It's amazing how they managed to weave in these personal stories, full of moral dilemmas and emotional weight, into a crisis that literally spans multiple worlds. It makes me wonder, was this complexity part of what drew so many readers to Infinite Crisis?
I think so. It's more than just spectacle. It's about these characters we care about wrestling with impossible choices. And the numbers back that up. Infinite Crisis, #1 and #2 were the top-selling comics of their respective months by a huge margin.
So it's clear that Infinite Crisis struck a chord with readers. But before we get into how it all resolves, I'm curious about those heroes who were watching from paradise. What specifically about the post-crisis world were they so disillusioned by? What actions did they see that made them question everything?
Well, they saw a world where heroes were constantly compromising their values. Take the Identity Crisis storyline, for example. That happened right before Infinite Crisis. And it revealed that some heroes had been altering villains' minds, basically violating their free will for the sake of safety.
That does sound like a morally gray area. I can see how those classic heroes.
With their more black and white view of good and evil, would be disturbed by that. Exactly. And it wasn't just that one incident. They saw heroes engaging in lethal force, forming morally questionable alliances, and generally acting in ways that blurred the lines between hero and vigilante. They felt like the world had lost its moral compass, and that the new generation of heroes was part of the problem.
So what did they do about it? Surely they didn't just sit back and complain.
You're right about that. They believed drastic measures were needed to set the world back on the right path. And that's where Alexander Luthor Jr. steps in as a key player.
The Luthor from the world where everything is reversed. That's got to be interesting.
He becomes the mastermind behind the whole crisis. He's convinced that the current Earth is beyond saving, and that the only solution is to recreate the multiverse, essentially starting from scratch with a new, perfect Earth.
So he's like a cosmic architect, with some seriously ambitious plans. But how does he even begin to pull that off? Does he have that kind of power?
He's a brilliant scientist and manipulator. And he finds a powerful pawn in Superboy Prime. Remember, Prime is from pre-crisis Earth Prime, a world that literally vanished. He feels lost and angry in this new reality, like everything he knew and fought for was erased.
Okay, so I can see how that makes him vulnerable to manipulation. Someone like Luthor could easily exploit that kind of resentment.
Precisely. Luthor feeds into Prime's anger, convincing him that they need to shatter this flawed reality and build a new one, where they can be the true heroes. It's a dangerous combination. Luthor's intellect and Prime's raw power.
Talk about a recipe for disaster. While all this is happening, the main DC heroes are still dealing with the fallout from all those lead-up events, right?
Right. They're fighting Omax, dealing with the Rann-Thanagar War, facing a rogue Spectre, and trying to stop a massive supervillain breakout orchestrated by the Secret Society. It's chaos on a global scale.
It sounds like they're getting hit from all sides, completely overwhelmed by these seemingly unconnected crises. But if Luthor is behind it all, it makes you wonder how these seemingly random events are all connected.
That's the genius of Luthor's plan. He's orchestrating these conflicts, either directly or indirectly, to weaken the heroes and destabilize the world. He's creating the perfect environment for his grand scheme to unfold.
So it's not just brute force. It's a calculated strategy to break down the very fabric of the DC universe. No wonder the heroes are struggling to keep up. They're fighting symptoms without even realizing there's a deeper disease at work.
And to make matters even more complicated, the heroes are also dealing with their own internal conflicts and moral dilemmas. That crisis of conscience storyline we talked about really exemplifies this. The Justice League is fractured, questioning their own actions and struggling to maintain unity in the face of this crisis.
The destruction of the Watchtower must have been a huge psychological blow on top of everything else. It's like a symbol of their world falling apart.
Exactly. And then you have Batman grappling with the return of Jason Todd as Red Hood. It forces him to confront his own failures as a mentor and the dark consequences of his relentless pursuit of justice.
It's fascinating how Infinite Crisis manages to weave in these deeply personal struggles alongside the universe-shattering events. It's that combination of the epic and the intimate that makes it so compelling.
Absolutely. And it's through these personal trials that the heroes ultimately find the strength to face the larger crisis. They have to confront their own inner demons before they can take on the cosmic threats.
Okay, so we've got Luthor and Superboy Prime working in the shadows, the heroes battling on multiple fronts, both physically and emotionally. How does it all come to a head? How do they finally confront these masterminds? Okay, so we've laid out like all the pieces on the board, The heroes battling external threats and internal struggles, Luthor pulling the strings, and Superboy Prime acting as this force of destruction. How does it all collide? What happens when these forces finally clash?
It all culminates in this series of epic confrontations with the fate of the universe hanging in the balance. One of the most pivotal moments is the battle between Superboy Prime and not one, but three Supermen. The current Superman, Wonder Woman, and Kal-El the Superman from Earth 2.
Wow, three Supermen against Superboy Prime. That's got to be one for the history books.
It's a brutal showdown that showcases the raw power of these Kryptonian heavyweights, but it's also a clash of ideologies. Kal-El, representing that classic ideal of selfless heroism, ultimately sacrifices himself trying to stop Superboy Prime's rampage.
That's a powerful moment. It really underscores the contrast between these different versions of Superman. One driven by hope and sacrifice, the other fueled by rage and a sense of entitlement.
Exactly, and it highlights the stakes of this entire crisis. It's not just about who's stronger, it's about what kind of heroes will shape the future of the DC universe.
While this epic battle is raging, what's Luthor doing? Is he just sitting back and watching his plan unfold?
Oh no, he's busy putting the final pieces of his plan into motion. He's using his scientific genius and reality warping powers to try and recreate the multiverse, according to his own design. He wants a world free from what he sees as the flaws and compromises of the current reality.
So in a way, he's become the ultimate expression of the disillusionment those heroes in paradise were feeling. He's taking their concerns to a terrifying extreme.
Precisely. He's trying to impose his own rigid definition of perfection on the entire universe. But the heroes, despite their losses and internal struggles, refuse to let that happen. They rally together, forming unexpected alliances and drawing on every ounce of strength they have left.
So it's not just a physical fight, it's a battle of wills, a fight for the very soul of the DC universe.
Exactly. And in the end, it's the heroes' combined willpower, their unwavering belief in hope and compassion. That overcomes Luthor's attempts at control. They manage to stop him from rewriting reality. But it's a hard-fought victory.
I can imagine. They've faced betrayals, losses, and moral compromises. This victory must feel bittersweet. What's the state of the DC universe after all the dust settles?
The universe is irrevocably changed. Many heroes are gone, and the world bears the scars of this massive conflict. But there's also a sense of hope, a renewed commitment to the ideals that define true heroism.
So even though they averted complete disaster, Infinite Crisis left its mark on the DC universe. You mentioned earlier that DC used the one-year-later event to jump the timeline forward. What was the purpose of that?
It was a clever way to explore the long-term consequences of the crisis, without getting bogged down in the immediate aftermath. 1 year later allowed them to show how the heroes had rebuilt, how the power dynamics had shifted, and what new challenges were emerging.
It must have been intriguing for readers, trying to piece together what happened during that missing year and how it reshaped the landscape of the DC universe.
Absolutely. And DC didn't leave them completely in the dark. They launched this very ambitious weekly series called 52, which chronicled the events of that missing year in real time, week by week.
A weekly series covering a whole year. That sounds like a massive undertaking, both for the creators and the readers.
It was a huge undertaking, but it was a brilliant move. 52 allowed DC to explore the fallout of Infinite Crisis from multiple perspectives. They focused on both the major players and the lesser-known heroes, showing how this event impacted every corner of the DC universe.
It's like they zoomed in on the human side of this cosmic crisis, showing how everyday people and lesser-known heroes were picking up the pieces and finding their own ways to be heroic.
Exactly. It emphasized that heroism isn't just about having superpowers or saving the world from cosmic threats. It's about resilience, compassion, and standing up for what's right, even in the face of personal struggles and seemingly insurmountable obstacles.
For 1 year later in 52 dealt with the immediate aftermath. But Infinite Crisis had a much broader impact, didn't it? It seems like it set the stage for a whole new era in the DC universe.
Absolutely. It was a turning point that reverberated throughout DC Comics for years to come. It challenged the very definition of heroism, forced characters to confront their flaws and compromises, and introduced new concepts and characters that would become integral to the DC universe.
And of course, there's that lingering foreshadowing of Final Crisis, which you mentioned earlier. How did Infinite Crisis lay the groundwork for that event?
Infinite Crisis weakened the barriers between realities, making the DC universe more vulnerable to cosmic threats. It's as if the very fabric of reality was left more fragile. more susceptible to forces beyond the hero's control. Final Crisis would explore those cosmic threats in terrifying detail.
So even though the heroes won the battle against Luthor and Superboy Prime, the war for the survival of the DC Universe was far from over.
That's a great way to put it. Infinite Crisis wasn't just a single event. It was a catalyst for a whole new era of storytelling, an era marked by higher stakes, darker threats, and a deeper exploration of the nature of heroism in a world constantly on the brink.
Well, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from the core concepts of Infinite Crisis to its lasting impact on the DC Universe. It's clear why this event continues to fascinate readers and spark debate even today.
It's a testament to the power of storytelling and the enduring appeal of these characters. Infinite Crisis asks tough questions about heroism, morality, and the choices we make in the face of overwhelming challenges.
It's been an incredible journey exploring all these layers of Infinite Crisis. Thanks for guiding us through this complex and fascinating event.
It's been my pleasure. And as we wrap up, I'd like to leave you with something to think about. Considering the themes of contrasting heroism we've discussed, how do you think modern comic book storytelling reflects or challenges the ideals of those classic heroes? It's a question worth pondering as you continue exploring the ever-evolving world of DC Comics.
That's an excellent point. It's been a blast diving deep into Infinite Crisis with you. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep believing in the power of stories.